The Holy Gospel according to John, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So when I was growing up, my home church had this incredible recipe for lemonade. Right? I know you were probably thinking I was going to say it was a great recipe for communion bread or a recipe for coney sauce or even Jell-O salad, but no. I remember lemonade. Every year our hometown had this Heritage Days festival. It's probably pretty similar to the one in Warsaw. Closed down many blocks in our downtown area for a few days. It brought out music and entertainment, craft vendors, and of course, food. I grew up working in our church stand, so you see I'm experienced, where we would sell, among other things, lemonade. Now, I don't want to get in trouble for giving away a secret recipe here, but it really ain't that big of a secret. All right, it started with Country Time powdered lemonade mix. But then, for every jug of lemonade mix you would make, we would add a pitcher of fresh squeezed lemon juice and another pitcher, ready for this? Fresh squeezed orange juice. Mind blown, I know, right? Right? Okay, it might not be as earth-shattering as I believed it was when I was a kid, but I still remember it. And I remember this one time at home where we were having all the family over for some special big dinner, and I begged my mom if we could make the church's lemonade. And reluctantly, she finally agreed, which meant we had to go to the store and buy the lemonade mix and buy the lemons and buy the oranges. And by the time we got home, I spent the next, what felt like hours, sitting at the kitchen table, squeezing and juicing those lemons and those oranges all by hand, just so I could make the greatest lemonade known to humankind. And there it was. Big plastic pitcher full to the top with this delicious lemonade. And our family began to arrive, and I was so excited to serve everyone this drink. And about that time, my grandmother, God rest her soul, came into the kitchen to help. And she saw that pitcher of lemonade sitting there, and she thought it looked like it needed to be shaken. And she picks it up and turns it over to start shaking it, and the plastic top comes off, and the entire pitcher dumps out. Luckily, she was standing over the kitchen sink when she decided to do this, but I stood there as I watched all that hard work and effort and money literally go down the drain. What a waste! So Kim always reminds me that I have this heart of problem of letting things go in my life. I think I'm starting to see that now. But because of this, I feel Judas's pain in this story, don't you? I mean, watching as this jar of costly ointment worth, they say, 300 denarii, which was probably about the typical tradesperson's annual salary, watching as that was all poured on the feet of this man. A year's salary. I saw someone estimate it in today's figures. That could have been, in their day, about $54,000 for one jar. Could you imagine that? Even if Mary didn't use all of it, what a waste. Just think of what that money could be used for. I mean, can't you just feel that reaction inside of you, that visceral reaction, when something that costs so much, or something that you spent so much time working on, or that you spent so much effort and put effort into, it's just gone, wasted? I mean, I can't tell you how many things like that deeply bug me because I feel like it was such a waste. For example, we have this antique clock at our house. It's probably nearly 100 years old. I think it was a family member's. I've been hanging on to it for years, in and out of storage as I've moved. I finally, when we got here, decided to have it fixed up, which meant I had to go and find someone that would work on it and drive and take it there and then go and pick it up and pay for it. And I get it home and I wind it up and I sit it on our bookshelf, and the thing is so loud that we've never wound it up again. I mean, I could tell you all kinds of stories of these things that I feel like I've wasted time and money on. And I can tell you I do have this problem of hanging on to stuff, I know. But I doubt I have to tell any more of these stories because really, how often do all of you have those experiences? I mean, how often do you feel like Lazarus in that story? Anyone? Oh, come on. I've seen you at annual meetings. Every single one of you should be raising your hand. No, I mean, we love to see resources used responsibly, whether it's our time or our effort or what we often think is most important, our money. We don't like to waste things. We try not to waste things. And if we're being honest, there's that thing inside of us that does cringe every time we see something going to waste. You know, I'm not trying to be mean to my grandmother. I don't want to feel ungrateful for having this family heirloom. This is the way we feel. So this story becomes quite cringeworthy for many of us, and it makes us wonder how God wants us to use these things in this world that God's given us to care for. But when we hear Judas speak up about this wastefulness, what does Jesus say in response? He says, "Leave her alone." You know, maybe Jesus is snapping at Judas because he knows the true intentions of why he says this, which we hear in John's Gospel. Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. Or maybe Jesus snaps at Judas because he knows that he will be the one who will betray him soon. Or maybe Jesus snaps at Judas because Jesus wants to honor Mary for this thing that she is doing for him. Which then makes me wonder about this story from Mary's perspective. I mean, you heard what she did. What are some of the words that you would use to describe what Mary did to Jesus? Just shout them out. How would we describe what Mary did? Extravagant. What else? Humble. Caring. Appreciated. Absolutely. I agree. Generous. loving, like Janice was saying. I mean, really, this service that Mary does for Jesus is something that's beyond words. In the midst of this dinner with family and friends and disciples, Mary gets up from the table, gets this ridiculously expensive jar of ointment, kneels before Jesus, and begins to pour this fragrant ointment on his feet and wiping it up with her hair. And Judas is concerned with the cost of it. What about everything else that's happening there? I mean, what about the touch that's happening between this man and this woman, which would never have been acceptable in that day? What about that humble service of getting down on the floor to serve one another at their feet? Kind of looks forward to what Jesus is going to do to his disciples soon. What about the generosity that is shown towards Jesus to use something so costly on him? What about that love that is shown in caring for him and preparing him for his upcoming death? Mary obviously knows what's about to happen to Jesus. Unlike all of the other disciples that Jesus has explained this to, Mary has been the one who's been listening, and she understands, and she believes that Jesus will face his death very soon. So maybe Mary has something to teach us about listening and believing. Maybe Mary has something to teach us about this radical generosity, about giving without hesitation and giving extravagantly. And maybe Mary has something to teach us about this deeply rooted love. So I think as we stand here together, getting ready to face Holy Week, both Judas and Mary have a lot to teach us about ourselves and about God. But there was someone else in that story who I think gets overlooked very often. And I know I forget about him, but who else did we hear was seated at the table with Jesus? Lazarus. In John's Gospel, in the chapter just prior to where we hear today's Gospel story, we have that story where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Jesus calls him from the tomb where he's been laying dead for 4 days and stinks. Lazarus awakens from death. He walks out of the tomb. He gets unwrapped from all those grave cloths. And then that's usually the last we hear of him. Even in today's story, we only got this brief mention that they were at Lazarus' home and he is at the table with Jesus and the others before they quickly turn attention to Mary and Judas. But think about Lazarus. What is he thinking as he's sitting there watching all of this? I mean, could you imagine? I used to be dead and here I am. Now what do I do? Now how do I go on living? But we hear all he does is sit there and watch. He watches this act of love and generosity. He watches this act of betrayal that's happening before him. And in the midst of all of that, he's called to bear witness to the new life that he has been given through the power of God. I'm sure Jesus was quite intentional about being at that house, in that place, as he prepares for his suffering and death. So we're told that he's in the town of Bethany. Have you ever stopped to think of what Bethany means? Bethany means house of the afflicted, house of misery. Jesus decides to end his ministry at the house of the afflicted, surrounded by death and new life, surrounded by honor and love, and surrounded by anger and betrayal. The one who came and was worshipped and adored at his birth now sits at a table with the sick and the poor. The one who cleansed the leper and brought the dead to life now gathers us together in one house, under one roof, where we will keep the feast of love and gratitude and offer it back to Jesus as a sign of our devotion, what we've been doing all of Lent. In this journey we're on with Jesus, He will take our poverty and our afflictions. He will take our disagreements and our not so pure motives. He will take our sin and our inability to get out from the underneath the weight of death, and He will bless it. Jesus will turn us all into this healing oil that will be poured out for the wounds of all the world. And as we hear, it will be costly, but Jesus will do it. And Jesus will do it for us. Amen.